workshop of the City Commission. This afternoon's agenda will be discussing the 2018 first quarter update. Will be led through this conversation by Mr. Wiggin. I assume after, Raul, maybe you make some introductions of the manager. But before we get into the item, are there any citizens to be heard on this item? Mayor, so far as you know. Anybody who's out there? Nobody wants to talk on it? Okay, great. We'll go ahead and move into the presentation. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, I'll tee it up. Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, this is your first quarter budget update. As you indicated, over the last couple of years, budget staff has prepared quarterly updates to keep you abreast of the current financial status of each of our 14 funds. I note that because we discuss often our general fund, but we do have 14 funds that we use to account for all of the activities within the city government. In today's update, we will get a check-in on our capital plan, so not just our operating budget, but as well as our capital plan. We'll update you on the municipal cost comparison. That's a tool that was developed probably a year and a half ago to kind of gauge the total cost of municipal services, not limited to ad valorem taxes, but all those fees and charges that our citizens pay and how we compare to other communities, as well as an update on our FEMA reimbursement, and then looking forward the assumptions that we will use and looking for your guidance for our fiscal year 19 budget as we look ahead to prepare for next year. Raul Lavin, Robert Wiggin, and Amy McLean. I'm not sure you've met Amy in this setting before. She will walk us through this budget process, and they're joined by your executive team. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Raul.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, Mayor, and Commissioners. Reese just actually took my front page. So anyways, as Manager said, we're here to give you an update on the budget, not only the 18 budget and where we are as it relates to the first quarter of fiscal year 18. And Robert's going to walk through the status of all the funds. We're in pretty good shape, but he'll talk in detail about those. We also want to talk a little bit about some of our accomplishments in the first quarter. You've identified a number of priorities over the last couple of years that center on 3 specific issues, and I'm going to talk about some of the accomplishments in the first quarter that we've had in those areas. The Commission also asked us to update you on a timely manner on where we are with FEMA reimbursements. There was an article in the paper not too long ago. Robert and Amy are going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the preliminary assumptions that we have going into the 2019 budget and solicit some feedback from the Commission on the appropriateness of those assumptions. Mostly they're similar to what we've had in the past, but we want affirmation from the Commission that those are adequate ones to continue for the future. And then we'll talk a little bit about the calendar, the budget calendar, and community opportunities for the community to get involved in the budget process and provide input to the Commission. So as you all recall, the Commission over the last couple of years has identified 3 specific areas as priority areas, and these include public safety, economic development, and infrastructure. And let me talk a little bit about each of these. In the area of public safety, last month we provided you a public safety update where the Chief gave you some updated information on where we are with crime. I think it's important to recognize some of the actions that the Commission has taken over the last few years that have led us to where we are today, and I'm going to talk about the most recent numbers and the most recent crime statistics numbers. But since 2015, the Commission has approved an additional 55 positions in TPD, and that's a combination of positions that were grant funded through the COPS grant or funded outright by the City Commission. Additionally, we've engaged in public engagement with the impacted neighborhoods, the creation of the Public Safety Collective, progress on arresting individuals on TPD's top 10 list, installation of cameras in problem areas, and initiatives such as the Tempo, which as of last month had 164 referrals, and we had 119 participants in GED programs, which is a great success, have all contributed to a reduction in the overall crime in the community. And as of November of 2017, which is the last statistics that we have, there's been a reduction of 13.77 in crime from the same time period last year. So I think we're moving in the right direction. There's a trend going downward, and all the actions and leadership of the City Commission, all the initiatives that you've taken or approved have contributed to this. In the area of economic development, over the years, you'll recall that we've implemented a number of initiatives that have helped out the local economy, and these includes programs such as fast-tracking changes that were approved a number of years ago to not only streamline the procurement process, but also the permitting process to ensure that city funds for capital projects were being released in a faster manner, as well as the permitting process to ensure that the timeframes for permitting were reduced and streamlined. We've also have the permit guarantee process that was implemented a number of years ago. We've done double rebates. We've done return of utility deposits. A couple years ago, the commission eliminated the business tax, and all of these have really helped stimulate the local economy over the last few years. And as you'll have seen in the paper, and we presented this not too long ago, a recent report from the Federal Bureau of Economic Analysis shows that Tallahassee has the fastest growing economy on a per capita basis of the 22 MSAs in the state. So great news story, and all attributed to the leadership and the initiatives that the commission has approved over the last few years that have led us to this point. Infrastructure is also one of the priorities that you identified, and as you'll recall, over the last 5-6 years, we had some problems being able to fund adequate capital projects for the government. And this was done mostly because of the downturn in the economy, and we're trying to balance the budgets. But over the last couple of years, we've been able to reinvigorate the amount of funding that goes for capital infrastructure. And over the last couple of years, with your leadership, we've included $5 to $6 million in the budget to support capital projects. In the 2018 budget, we, within all of our funds and all our departments, we're investing a total of $177 million in public infrastructure in the community. And this has a huge impact on the local economy. There's a multiplier effect on those dollars. And so we're doing our job to try to keep the local economy moving, ensuring reliability of our services, and also ensuring that we continue to maintain high quality of services for our cities and residents. Which leads me to the next slides that you'll see on the presentation. I think one of the important issues that we've faced over the last few years is how do we maintain the financial viability of the organization and ensuring that we have the proper finances to support our budget, our programs, and continue to maintain the services that our citizens have grown accustomed to and enjoy receiving from the organization. And many of you will recall that not too long ago, the credit rating agencies put us on a negative credit watch as a result of depletion of the deficiencies fund. And with your leadership and action, we took specific steps to restore that fund. And as a result, not only was a negative credit watch removed from the credit rating agencies in New York, but recently we received superior ratings from Standard & Poor's and Moody's in New York, reflecting the quality of our financial and operational management in the city. And this is in addition to back in September where Fitch actually affirmed our credit rating agencies too. So good direction. We've taken significant steps. They were hard steps to take, but under the leadership of the commission, we've been able to restore our finances, and we're a well-financed, well-managed organization that has financial viability, good financial viability. One of the most important things is to look at customer feedback on our services, and a recent survey tells us that 90% of those surveyed indicate that they're happy with city services, with 58% rating those services as excellent. And I think this is a testament to the city's workforce that continues to go that extra mile in ensuring that garbage is picked up, our streets are swept, that our parks are in tip-top shape, that we've got programs for our residents. And that's evidenced by the recent survey results that we got, giving us very, very high marks for our services. And then, as we've shown you before, the municipal cost comparison shows that not only do we provide high-quality services, but we provide those at a low cost to our community and our residents. And we've recently updated that municipal cost comparison that shows that among the survey cities that we compare ourselves to, we're the 11th lowest out of the 12th. So high-quality service at a low cost, high ratings from our community, a strong financial position for the organization. I think these are great metrics to show the community, and this is really a result of a lot of the programs and initiatives that you've allowed us to implement over the last few years. So this time, let me turn it over to Robert, where he's going to talk about where we are as it relates to the 2018 budget. And then Amy is going to talk a little bit about the 2019 budget and the processes that we're implementing.
Thank you, Raul. Commissioners, the fiscal year 18 budget was developed using direction from you on policy, your priorities that you developed early in the year, and public involvement all through the process. We focused on public safety, public infrastructure, all the examples Raul gave, and we measured ourselves to make sure that we were achieving success. I'll delve into the fiscal year 18 first quarter results in greater detail. And in order to do that, I want to show a slide that we use to measure ourselves. Remember that the process of the quarterly updates is to make sure that as we go through the year, we're doing the right things at the right time for the right reasons. We continuously evaluate our progress. We want to identify evolving issues as they arise, address those issues, and then make strategic budget adjustments to reflect that. Timely information also then gives us a good picture of where we need to go for the preparation of the coming budget year. And in order to demonstrate that, we look at each of the 14 funds in detail. The slide that we've provided you has been enlarged quite a bit in order to show the 14 operating funds. This is our fund status that I'd like to walk through for a few minutes. The first fund that we're showing, the general fund, donations, building inspection, fire, electric. Down the left are those 14 funds. And then next to those, we identify key drivers. Those are the assumptions that we use to develop the budget. In the first quarter, we've got 3 months worth of data to look at, October, November, and December. And so there are some results that we can take from that experience of what the actual revenue was and what the actual expenditures was. What we really need to do and understand is what was the basis for the budget, and are we still mirroring that basis for the budget so that we know going forward if any changes need to be brought about. As you may notice, we provided a rating to give you some perspective, a quick reference guide. Green is indicative that we're within budget in the first quarter. There are no issues that we see that need to be monitored at this time, and we expect to finish the year with a balanced budget. Were there going to be issues that we needed to monitor, changes in passenger traffic, changes in ridership, changes in sales, those sorts of things, then we may put that in a yellow status to say that we need to monitor that more closely, that some initial actions or planning may need to take place. We don't have that situation at this time after the first quarter of fiscal year 18. The red status is for those areas where there's dramatic changes. If we saw a precipitous decrease in sales, a really high increase in ridership that couldn't be handled with the planning that we had already developed. And so that's what those key drivers kind of give us an indication of what to look for within each of the 14 operating funds. As Reese mentioned, and as you well know, we account for each of those funds individually because there is a separate revenue source for each of those funds. We account for these major service areas so that we know how the revenues are paid, what they should support as far as what the programs are, and then what services should be delivered as a result of those revenues. If allow me to take some time to talk about the general fund more specifically, because it's a complex fund. It's made up of our public safety operations. It's made up of our community housing and human services, as well as some of our human service funding. It also includes our parks and recreation and then our public infrastructure. So all of those services in one fund requires a lot of diligence and focus by each of the departments within that area. The most discussed general fund revenue is our property taxes. Our property tax millage rate is at 4.1 mils, which is second lowest among our peers, which means not only is it controlled by your direction and by your leadership in setting what that millage rate is going to be, but there are also caps that are in place, legislatively approved caps. In 1992, voters approved Amendment 10, which is also known as Save Our Homes. And so any increases on property value is controlled by either 3% as a cap or CPI, whichever is less. And any additional funding, then, we primarily receive from new development that's been put on the tax roll. And so that's about 20% of our general fund budget, so it's something we pay very close attention to and know that there's a controlled, a recognizable amount of growth in that revenue source. In the general fund, another funding source that accounts for about 11% of our general fund are our state legislatively directed revenue sharing. Say that 3 times real quick. The state revenue sharing began in 1931. It was primarily a tax on motor fuels. It was 3 cents at the time. We're now at 39 cents. That state revenue sharing comes to us based on population or assessed value. So again, that's some perspective on another portion of our general fund revenues that then funds those public safety, parks and recreation, public infrastructure, and human service type activities. The general fund also includes user fees for specific services, and it depends upon the type of user or recipient of the service. Some of those are fully costed. They are fully costed in order to fairly share the cost, for example, in parking, in adult sports. Those type of user fees are developed to be full cost recovery. There are other user fees that are developed to encourage participation, youth sports, animal services, and those again are directed by policy that we develop in the financing the government policy to acknowledge that we want to encourage participation in those areas. There are other user fees that are full cost recovery, and they're for services that we provide, FDOT contracts where we maintain roads on behalf of the state, and or security at football games is another good example. Those user fees are about 7% of our annual general fund budget. And then a fourth significant general fund revenue is the general fund transfer. Being in the municipally owned electric, water, sewer, gas, and solid waste business gives us the opportunity to keep what would normally be a shareholder profit in the community. It enables us to provide services to those tax-exempt entities, churches, the state, universities, and is an important revenue source in order to balance the budget to provide the quality of life and those human services and general benefit services to all the general fund departments. Those general fund transfer revenues are consistent with rate preparation. They're evaluated by the rating agencies when they review us. As Raul mentioned, we received excellent rating marks, and they are taken into consideration with sales in our utilities. That's important because we've specifically said we are going to be working towards conservation approaches in our utilities, and so that means that we have to be very judicious in how we use that general fund transfer and how we use it in parks and recreation, public safety, and those other general funded entities. Ultimately, in reviewing the first quarter fiscal year 18, when we look at property taxes, when we look at state revenue sharing, when we look at user fees, and when we look at the general fund transfer, the good news is that the general fund revenues are on pace with our budget adoption. They are coming in as we expect. They're consistent with prior years. But there is difficult news in that these general fund revenue sources are limited. They're typically limited by CPI, by a little bit less than CPI, by population growth, and so it's something that we need to be aware of. In order to balance the budget, then, when we look at expenditures, we're looking at the most efficient, effective, and best way to provide services across the government. when we look at the expense side of the ledger, we make every effort to keep salaries, overtime, contract services, and utilities within budget. There's continuous improvement principles, planning, implementing, evaluating results, making adjustments, and then great coordination between leadership, standards, resources, and community expectation. There's great efficiency in field operations, effective supervisory crew planning and scheduling, and then good management ensuring tools and technical experiences available to that workforce. And then finally, we use feedback from the community, performance measures, surveys, comparisons, and then community involvement to make sure that we have the right approach and the services that we're delivering. I've spent a little bit of extra time discussing the general fund based on its complexity, based on the importance of the services that it delivers, that it requires coordinated management with areas that are not necessarily working directly together but do communicate well. And then we also use responsible accounting to make sure that those areas are funded well and provide the services. As we go down the list of other fund status items, the 13 other funds are more directly tied to a unique service, and so the financial metrics give us more immediate feedback when we look at how they're succeeding and how they're remaining with a balanced budget. Our utilities, electric, gas, water, sewer, solid waste, all of their sales and rate performance is a leading metric, and and they have indications to us that we're going to be within budget. It's encouraging because it tells us what our ability is to meet our debt requirements, what we need to in order to repair, replace, and maintain our systems, and then what good financial metrics are there so that we can continue to support the general fund. In the first quarter of fiscal year 18, all utility sales are above or on pace with budget adoption. And so that's, again, positive news. Other funds like Aviation, Star Metro, and Golf, their work's directed by airline passengers, transit riders, rounds of golf, respectively, and they're performing as expected also, consistent with budget plans. So again, more positive news.
I have to ask, what about cemeteries?
Yeah, the cemeteries, we are aware of where they are. I think at this point,
Not going anywhere.
we know the issues with those cemeteries. I think it's commendable that we know that there's a 10-year window that we're working with. As we get closer into that 10-year window, some decisions need to be made. I think some of those decisions will come as development occurs, and as we see what the landscape looks like for a cemetery. No pun
Are we
intended.
going to have an agenda item at any point on that topic to give us an idea of what your timeline is? And I mean, I have to fit it into my own timeline, so hopefully it won't be a major issue there. But anyway, the point is that I really would like to have a discussion and find out what your thinking is, when you plan on starting this process, and so at some point it'd be nice to hear more about that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Yes. One area that's a little bit unique from the other funds that I wanted to share a little bit of experience is in building inspection. As you well know, we've seen sustained construction, and that sustained construction means workload for building inspection. We've recognized that, they've recognized that, and rather than addressing that solely with temporary and overtime, they've added 2 positions from existing resources across the government, added a plans examiner and a building inspector. That has been accomplished in the first quarter, and we expect the onboarding to happen during the second quarter of the fiscal year. Another area that's of note in the first quarter, after the first quarter of the fiscal year 18, is in growth management. Growth management, working in coordination with the Greater Frenchtown and Southside CRA, has conducted removal of abandoned buildings. And in that case, the intent is to reduce crime opportunities, address neighborhood blight, and to create possible locations for future affordable housing. Great example of evaluating needs, knowing what resources are available, not necessarily waiting for a budget process to move forward, but to follow the leadership and strong direction you've given to address the economy, to address neighborhoods, and to address public safety. To date, 16 structures have been removed citywide. I've got some before and after pictures, and I think they tell a powerful story. 9 of these are just a sampling, but 9 of the 16 use city or CRA funds for the demolition. And working with the neighborhood also through code enforcement, 7 of the 16 use property owner funding to remove those structures. And then there are plans for an additional 27 sites to be demolished as we proceed through the fiscal year.
I've raised my hand for myself to call on me. That is really good news. During our housing workshop, we talked about the option of potentially using land trust as a way to increasing affordable housing. I'm wondering if the next step of this might be what it would look like to put in trust some of these properties, and I'm not quite sure if the trust required that they be contiguous, but would be interested in sort of knowing what the opportunities might be around expanding affordable housing on some of these now newly demolished plots of land.
Yeah, Mayor, we're looking at that issue, and we'll be bringing back an affordable housing update on March 21st, I think it is, and we'll be incorporating some information on the trust. We've also been offered some training on how trusts work, and we've invited a whole bunch of partners to come to that training. I believe that's the first week in April. To sort of start looking into that possibility, but we'll be providing an update on that as part of the workshop in a few weeks.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, if you start in the far right, top pictures, you'll notice that if you're driving by and or walking by those locations, the before and after pictures really send a different message, not only to the local neighbors, but anybody who's passing through. Those 2 pictures on Nashville Drive are very positive improvements. If you'll notice on the bottom right and the top left, we've got a demolition that's occurred with the owner participating in part of the demolition, and then in another instance where we've used our city and CRA funding to do the demolition. So again, a good example of partnerships and working with the neighborhood. And then on the bottom left, what struck me in looking at this picture is the neighbors on the right-hand side, the left-hand side, and behind have to be very, very inspired to see that change come about. And so again, great example of the first steps that we should be taking as we get information back on what actions need to be taken. We committed to regular updates also on the progress of our cost reimbursement with the hurricanes that we've experienced these last 2 years. We're working with Florida Division of Emergency Management and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They're here on a biweekly basis to meet with us, specifically about Irma most recently. We expect to have 75% of our Irma reimbursement submitted at the end of February. We'll have 100% of that submitted end of March. That then starts the process for reimbursement to occur. We're using many of the means that we used in Irma to maximize the recovery, and FEMA's been there every step of the way to ensure that we're eligible for those activities. And that amount at current estimate is about $4 million in Hurricane Irma reimbursement that we're working towards. Commissioner?
Now, that money goes back into the source where it came from, right?
Yes, we set up initial projects for each of the funding, for each of the departments and funding areas. Whatever the reimbursement is comes back coded to those specific projects, so it's reimbursed and reflected as revenue for the general fund for electric, water, sewer, the various departments that are involved in that recovery effort. In the case of Hurricane Hermine, we've had about $6.2 million in reimbursement. We have a total of $14 million that is in process. That is moving forward also, and we feel like because it was such a large storm and such a complex storm, when we look across the spectrum of who is getting reimbursement, that we're ahead of the game. It's fortunate that we plan well, have reserves, are able to support those expenditures at the time to restore the system, and then receive reimbursement after the fact. And we're working towards a closeout process where we expect reimbursement by the end of the year, the full reimbursement of the $14 million, but the closeout will take some time. In fact, we're obligated to keep those records for a 5 to 7 year period after the closeout of the storm. And many times there are questions about documentation and supporting information that not only will FEMA and the state ask for, but then the Inspector General for the various agencies follow up with. So again, we're in a good place with that reimbursement also.
Robert, before you leave this topic, and Commissioner Miller, along those lines, so Robert mentioned the use of reserves. Clearly, Hurricane Hermine and Hurricane Irma impacted us. Even in between, there was a January storm that impacted us that resulted in millions of dollars of damage to our community. And we were able to restore that damage and pay for it from our reserves and our working capital. Those are the reasons you have these reserves, and we talk about that often. So I wanted to interject that there's a reason you have these funds. I know in particular in the electric industry, you hear discussion about a recovery mechanism. So the utilities spend money to restore their systems, and then they go back out to their customers and they ask to increase the bills for maybe a temporary period of time, but for some period of time. As you know, there was never any discussion of that with this commission. There was, the effort was made, the money was spent. There was a hope initially that we would recover the dollars, at least in part from FEMA. And Robert and his team, I think, are doing a masterful job recovering it. But we're now many months removed from those events. And so even when you may do it quickly, it takes some time. And so you need the reserves, you need that working capital to be able to restore our system. And then you would have the comfort, and I would have the comfort, that you don't have to go back to your customers or your community and ask to increase the fees.
That's a fair point.
Thank you. So ultimately, the first quarter review reinforces that budgets are balanced, that sound financial decisions have been made and continue, and that responsive services are being provided by the workforce to the community. With that background and some of the lessons learned from that first quarter, I'd ask Amy McLean to discuss the 19 budget. First of all, just to give a little background, Amy's been with Resource Management for 5 years. She has a 28-year career in municipal government, worked as a clerk treasurer, a finance director, budget director, and then a utilities analyst. She not only serves on our team as a direct reference or direct expert with our enterprise funds, but then she also supervises quite a number of our utility analysts and our analysts in the Resource Management Department. Amy, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Well, looking forward to planning for the fiscal year 19 5-year capital plan, we want to start by looking at the 18 CIP. You can see, hopefully, in the chart, if we maybe blow it up a little bit, the scale and size and the breakdown of our capital plan for 18. The chart illustrates the breakdown of the $177 million in capital projects. And as we've emphasized tonight, that investment not only builds and maintains the infrastructure needed to provide services over the long term for our customers, but these projects provide a direct economic benefit to the community during their development and construction. The added long-term economic benefit is that we're providing quality services and a reliable capacity of infrastructure that can make us attractive to outside investors. Although we adopt a 5-year capital plan, really most of the planning, particularly in the larger categories you see here, are based on 20-year master plans. These are updated from time to time. You've probably seen them come to you in the agenda for the updates. And these master plans, of course, identify the long-term needs for capital investment to expand, replace, or reconstruct existing systems. And it also identifies the ongoing capital maintenance investment required to maximize the efficiency and useful life of these assets. So the 20-year plans are really what inform the 5-year planning that we do at this level. Another key element of our capital planning process is the determining what the appropriate mix of cash and debt financing should be, and when to use debt to spread the cost of improvements, which may provide services for 20 or 30 years over the useful life of the asset. To manage and monitor cash and debt timing, the Treasurer Clerk's Office chairs a quarterly credit meeting. We just had one recently. And this brings together department and project managers, accounting, resource management staff, and together the current and planned projects are reviewed to coordinate cash needs with the timing of bond refunding and new bond issues. It's what he was saying earlier about the right thing at the right time for the right reason. There's a lot of that has to go on at these quarterly credit meetings. The effort is to ensure that capital needs are met through a system of financing that preserves the fiscal health of the funds, so that we get good credit ratings when we go out to the bond market, provides funding at the right time for capital needs, and spreads the cost of these large assets over their useful life. And this is what helps us maintain rates that are competitive with our peers by making these long-term plans and good decisions about how we finance it. The Treasurer Clerk's Office oversees this process within the guidelines of the city's debt management policy. And if you want to know a whole lot more about this, you can go to TalGov, where we have our debt profile. It's reviewed in the annual report to bondholders, so you can take a look at that. There's a wealth of information there. So the other task, so really the 5-year plan becomes more of an update, review, and refinement process. And some of the tasks include refining the scope of the upcoming projects, updating cost estimates based on more recent data, updating project construction schedules, revising funding plans based on the timing of the cash needs, and adding recurring master projects and new proposed design or construction starts planned for the 5th year, fiscal 23. Budgeting at this level, as you can see again from the scope of this, is we do this at a high level. We use master projects to define significant capital programs or specific projects that are large and multi-phase. And then we use sub-projects within these to define the different parts and parcels of the overall project. And just like the operating budget, the capital budget is a continuous process of programming, execution, and feedback. So we will continue to use the quarterly updates to come back and make adjustments to the capital plan as we would to, again, do the right thing at the right time for the right reason. Looking at the table here, I just wanted to highlight some of what's already in 18, because this is a good preview of where our priorities and emphasis are for our capital investment program, starting with roads, streets, and sidewalks, which is in kind of the lower orange triangle there. As illustrated, we're investing $20.5 million total for road, streets, and sidewalks in fiscal year 18. To give some idea of the scale of what we're talking about, we have 650 miles of roadways and 500 miles of sidewalks. And this is something that impacts everybody every day as you're driving around. Through the commission leadership, we did increase the funding from the general fund to $6.5 million this current year, and the rest of the funding that comes from sales and gas taxes. And we also have some bonds that are going out later this year. This is based on the reimbursement resolution y'all passed in September of 17, and that's going to be about $30.8 million. Looking again here, you see the largest one at the top, the electric utility. Their plan includes significant funding for distribution upgrades and modifications, substation modifications, energy efficiency and demand-side management improvements, as well as new service installations, a total of $30.3 million in capital projects. This level of investment relates to the size and scope of our electric utility. This is a system that serves 119,000 customers over a 221 square mile service territory. We currently have 3 generating stations with a total net generating capacity of 746 megawatts. We also have the new 120-acre solar energy farm as part of this system. And just to keep this going and deliver it to your door, we have 3,500 miles of primary and secondary distribution lines. So there's a reason for the scale of this investment and the necessity for it. Funding for electric for these capital programs are generally split between bonds and operating transfers, and we do recover about $2 million a year for the new service installations that we do that can be more of a joint project with the customer. Again, looking at the table, you have it's showing water and wastewater separately. Wastewater has $27 million invested for 18 and $18 million for water. Both systems, as you can imagine, require significant capital maintenance and reinvestment over time, and both are essential to public health and safety as well as environmental protection. Significant master projects for the water fund include distribution system improvements, system extensions and upgrades, and water line relocations related to road work. These projects are funded with a mixture, again, of bonds, water operating transfers, and also water system charges that are dedicated for expansion of these systems. The water utility system has a production capacity of 76 million gallons a day of clean, safe, reliable drinking water. And I hear it tastes really good, too. The system includes 27 production wells, 1,200 miles of pressurized main, 6,800 fire hydrants, and over 84,000 service points. The wastewater capital program for 18 at $27 million. These master projects that continue will be things like collection system rehabilitation, sewer line relocations related to roadway improvements, and these programs are funded primarily from sewer operating transfers, again, the cash side, bond funding, and then there's also a sewer system charge for service expansion that's used. The advanced wastewater treatment plant, has a capacity to treat 26.5 million gallons of wastewater per day. This treatment level, as you know, meets and exceeds all local, state, and federal standards. So this is the part about public health for our customers and public health for the environment. We collect at 72,000 service points and use 108 lift and pump stations, 139 miles of force main, and 900 miles of gravity main to provide that service. So that's a significant reinvestment that you have to make for a system like that. One of the other large categories I wanted to touch on was aviation. The fiscal year 18 program is $23.7 million in capital improvements. The funding for the airport improvements comes from the Federal Aviation Administration and the Florida Department of Transportation. They provide funding for a lot of these improvements, and we also add in, of course, airport RR&I, cash transfers from operating of the airport, passenger facility charges, customer facility charges, and we also have some 2020 sales tax advance funding that we'll be considering as we move forward with the plans for the 5-year 19 through 23 plan. The Tallahassee International Airport provided service for 600 departures and arrivals in fiscal year 2017, and that's a 2.7 increase over the prior year. A couple notable projects I wanted to mention that are moving through the plan and that we'll be working on in the 5-year plan starting in 19 is the public safety campus. You've all heard a lot about the plans there. The idea is to address the current and future needs for the headquarters of the Tallahassee Police Department and apply innovative planning and design to transform the traditional vision of the police headquarters into a facility that can serve as a catalyst for community engagement. Currently, there is $1.4 million included in the 5-year plan for next year to begin the planning and design. The size, the project itself is currently estimated at about $53 million, and we have $46.5 million in the plan, and that's based on our expectation that we will sell the land of the existing headquarters for about $7 million. This, again, are these funding options of how we'll approach this to bring the financing and do the right timing. We'll be working on that as part of this plan. And we'll also be able to refine that as the project scope and requirements are refined through planning and public engagement. In our Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Affairs Department, currently for fiscal year 18, they have $1.9 million in capital funding, and this covers their usual recurring master project for our R&I at the parks, community center upgrades, and paving projects. One of the significant items that will be moving through the plan soon is the senior center. Canopy Road Development at Walani has dedicated land for a location for the senior center. And as we review the 5-year plan and develop it, again, we'll be looking to refine the project scope, the requirements, look at the timing, and all of that will be impacted by planning and public engagement on what that center will be like. So this is just a preview of the kind of issues we're working on to get ready, because the next step for the capital improvement plan for the next 5 years is presenting it at the May 9th meeting. So we'll be bringing more detail, and we'll be able to dive a little deeper into that at that meeting. And before I completely move off from capital, I wanted to note the photos that you see there. Some of this may look familiar to you because there was an article in the paper, but what these are the 2 new generators that were delivered to Substation 12 near Medical Drive and Centerville Road. These are 310,000-pound generators, and they, as you can see, they had to kind of bring them in on rails and get them installed. It's a big production. And these will provide, of course, backup power to the medical corridor. Which, as a citizen and someone who's been in the medical corridor a couple times since I've lived here, I appreciate very much. So moving on, the next phase is also the preparation of the fiscal year 19 operating budget. As we said, we've talked about these before, but we want to continue to bring them out and affirm them, and that's the operating assumptions that we'll use to begin to build the budget. The first being that the millage rate will remain at 4.1 mils. As we've said, keeping the millage rate stable and low while we continue to provide high-quality services is good for our citizens and is also a draw for economic development. One of the things we'll be looking at down the line when we look in terms of operating is in November, Floridians will vote on an amendment that would increase residential homestead exemption by another $25,000. As we've looked, and this increase would benefit only 41% of properties in the city. However, as we develop the 19 operating budget, we will be making plans for this possibility.
Do you mean 41% of residential properties?
41% of properties.
So, well, I guess this doesn't help unless I know how much commercial property ownership versus how much residential, because I know this doesn't apply to everyone, and that was one of the questions I had for you today, was exactly who does this apply to, and exactly what portion of our residential property is going to be affected, and what is the number that we're looking at. Okay.
And we have some materials I can send that fortunately I don't have right in front of me, but they give the full detail of how that works and how it impacts the city.
You might want to distribute that in a bullet, 1-pager to us.
Definitely, definitely. So we're also monitoring, and thank you for that question. It's a good reminder that we need to get that back out again, get that information out. We are also monitoring during this early session other legislative activity that could bring potential budgetary impacts. We also are scanning the horizon for economic issues, et cetera, anything that will have to play into that operating plan. Another assumption is that we will not be adding positions unless they're funded through grants or rates. Last year, the city completed a difficult cycle of workforce reduction to position the city for financial sustainability. Controlling personnel costs is key to ensure that the size of the organization does not exceed the pace of revenue growth, and that we maintain an appropriate level of capital reinvestment. One of the other assumptions are that the CHSP program will continue to be funded at the increased level of $1.8 million, and COCO will be receiving $192,000. The other assumption that we work with and continually is that we complete a 5-year rotation for rate studies for our enterprise funds. The next ones to be done are the electric and gas studies, and those will be completed probably late summer, early fall of this year. And the rate study process, of course, as we can go through that rotation through all of the funds, continues to make sure our rates are make sense given the scope of what we're doing, that we're following our financial plan, and that we're making adjustments as we need to, and that we're again appropriately funding not only the operating costs but the capital, debt, and cash needs of the fund. So as you can see from the calendar, there it is, there are 10 formal public opportunities for community involvement in the budget process, and they're listed here. At the same time, however, on TalGov, our financial transparency webpage provides a variety of ways to view our operating budget, our actuals compared to budget, our capital plan, even the city's checkbook, all online, and all of these resources provide users with a wealth of information that is one click away. So you don't have to wait for a meeting to find out more. All of these resources will give you a lot of information on what we're looking at. First and foremost, in our view, is, of course, our operating budget presentation that we've done online. In 2017, the Resource Management and Communication Departments collaborated to redesign the online presentation of the budget. The emphasis was on providing a user-friendly, mobile-friendly budget site that would meet professional peer review standards. We achieved that goal, and for our 30th year in a row, received the GFOA's Distinguished Budget Award, this time solely for the online presentation. That was for 17. Well, we've decided to keep going, and we've created some improvements to the 18 budget website. As you can see here, one of the things is a strategic use of videos instead of just still images, because these have a unique way of showing the scope of our infrastructure and really that we're a city at work. We also include in this, we've tried to improve some of the graphics to make this a more user-friendly type of presentation. Graphics like this one that compares our low millage rate with some of our peers. We also have included on this the report you heard earlier on municipal cost comparisons, so that the citizens can also see the incredible value they're getting for all of the services and infrastructure they're receiving. We have other links here that include, you can go straight to the financial policies if you're really interested in reading all about, down to any level of detail. You can stay at a summary level or drill down. We also have this budget calendar, and we'll be adding the functionality as we did last year of the citizens will be able to come into the budget calendar and create appointments on their own personal calendar directly while they're on the fly here, so they can remind themselves that they want to come to the meeting. We also are doing a more strategic linking of the budget presentation to individual department websites to provide a lot of insight and dynamic information for the users. And for example, if you click here in aviation, whoops, you'll get a brief description of the department, but then we've also included a link to the airport's website. And as you can see from the menu items available, there's statistics, master planning, information on flights, on passengers. So it really, right at the moment that you're in the presentation, thinking about, well, what's all involved, you can go and get just a whole new viewpoint on that department. One of the other things that we have in the budget presentation is there's a link that you can move down to that takes you to the different departments' capital projects plans, and you can see lists of specific project names, the amounts, and descriptions of those individual projects as you see here, so that you can, if there's a particular one you're interested in, you can focus in on it and find out, is it there, is it where I thought, is it this year? It's all there. We also, of course, have in this the financial schedules that we use to adopt the budget. But in addition to this, I have to say, amazing presentation that we're very proud of, we have even more interactive ways of viewing budget information, progress on our budget, and all of the things that we'll be talking about at these upcoming public hearings. If you go to our OpenGov application, as you see here, sorry.
It's on Match.com.
Sorry. If you go to our OpenGov application, you can see a series of reports that have been preset to provide a graphical representation of the information we're talking about. Here you're seeing the 2018 operating budget broken down into the different funds. So you're getting a lot of information at a glance, and you have the opportunity to change the views here and view it in any particular perspective you're interested. You can also scroll down, and if you want to have the numbers behind the graph, you can not only see them here, but you can go up to the top right hand, click on share, and download a spreadsheet that gives you those numbers, or you can download the image. In other words, it's completely interactive and provides resources directly to our citizens. One of the other reports we have in OpenGov is the 5-year capital plan. This is the 18 capital plan that we're looking at now. And it's a fairly simple table, but it compares the 18 capital plan and highlights the different categories of investment and compares it to the 17 plan. And then again, as you scroll down, you can see specific detail on projects that are in the plan, which you can then again download if you wish. We also include in OpenGov an ongoing review of our actual expenses compared to budget. We have the 2018 actual expenses. This chart will expand as each month goes by, and what you're seeing on the left-hand side is the total budget that we've adopted, and then as each month goes by, there's a cumulative total to show you exactly how we're progressing through that budget and in what categories. Again, there's detailed line items below this that you can dive down into, and you can download any of this information on OpenGov. And I invite you to go out there and take a look, and you can't hurt it, so change the views, take a look around, and see what you can find out. One of the other popular applications, not just out in the community, but in City Hall, as I understand it, is this city checkbook utility here in OpenGov. This allows citizens we've provided this service in the past, but this is a more interactive way of doing it, and again, that they can download, search, et cetera, to see specific payments that have been made. And there's a reconciliation process before this information goes out to make sure these are all completed payments, and so it just provides more openness and more the ability of the public to scrutinize us at any level they want to. So going back to our budget calendar, our next meeting will be on May 9th, and at that meeting we will focus on the 5-year plan, the fiscal year 19 through 23 plan, and present that to you. And as you see, we'll have other workshops and updates that will be coming as we move through this process, and we'll continue to check in for your input and leadership, and continue to hear from the public and pull both the capital and the operating budget together. So if you have any questions, I think we'll be happy to take them now.
Commissioner Richardson.
Just a question for the manager. Mr. Manager, could you give me a status report on the sidewalk projects for Putnam and Polk? And the reason I'm asking now is I'm frustrated with those projects because I was through that area the other day and saw people walking in the street on Putnam. And then there's an article in the most recent Capital Outlook where a young lady is complaining about the lack of sidewalks on Putnam, and she has to walk in the mud when it rains, and the overgrown grass and weeds because there are no sidewalks. And I know this is something I've been asking for and pushing for since I came to the commission, and we put money in last year's fiscal year budget for it. And at this point, I don't know that anything has started yet on those projects. And so if you could just give me a status report and when we anticipate
Yes, sir.
started with those projects.
I'll be happy to. Thank you for that question. And they're in different stages. The question was, is it related to Putnam, sidewalks on Putnam and sidewalks on Polk? And there was additional work that had to do with resurfacing of Putnam, which is interrelated. Design is happening on both. We are, as we progress with the design on Polk, we will hold and observe what happens as it relates to the land related to our public safety campus. As it relates to Putnam, it's progressing. So sometimes that's what happens is it's approved and it's progressing and it's in a design state that there's no evidence in the field of any work. That is taken into consideration other stormwater work that's happening or scheduled to happen as well. So, you know, one of our efforts last year, we said we want to do a better job of coordinating projects. So I know that collaboration is happening as well. So that's the status that it's in.
Any idea of what the timeline is for that project being completed? Another year, another 2 years? I mean,
no, I can't imagine it taking that long. You've given us the priority to do it. Okay. There is no priority that's come ahead of that. It is progressing as I might expect it would. So it's not been bumped from a priority status. It's not, the schedule's not been altered. I don't have the exact timing now. I'd be happy to brief you and actually offer a briefing. We could even get our experts in the room to talk more in depth, because sometimes these are beyond my expertise in terms of all the steps that have to go into that, because it does get a little complicated when you're dealing in already developed areas. And so that's kind of where we are in that process.
okay. And also, Mr. Mayor, I want to commend the manager and all of the staff for the work that you all have done. This is just absolutely phenomenal. I think that there is no greater transparency in a budget and a budget process than what we have done here with the city of Tallahassee in the 4 years or 3.5 years almost now that I've been on this commission. And we have provided ample opportunity for community and public input in that process. This website that you all have developed is just phenomenal. I can't imagine that it's second to none. And so we thank you all for that. I think what we are demonstrating to the public that we are operating an enterprise as large as the city of Tallahassee within our means and being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars with respect to how we spend those funds and the quality of services that our citizens receive. And, you know, relative to what we spend when we compare it to other municipalities, I think we're doing a phenomenal job. And so I just want to personally commend you all for that. And we just need to keep up that good work.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. Commissioner Miller.
Well, I want to second all of that. I mean, this has just been the last 2 or 3 years, 5 years have been such a turnaround. And honestly, we've had some criticism, and that's spurred everyone to get into action. And you guys, your presentation was terrific. I'm glad you're very proud of your website. That's always good, and it does look amazing, so I need to go look at it myself. But I did want to say that it's just so different, and I've actually heard from staff that it is easier for them to move forward on projects the way you're handling the budget too, so I think that's really important. I wanted to make 2 comments. One is about, you know, it's down here, it says public hearing on the 12th of September, and that really leads people to believe that that's the first time they have an opportunity to comment. That'll be commenting on the budget in really the final form, but somehow I think we need to indicate that people are able to come forward earlier than that at each one of these opportunities and make their comments. So if you can figure out a way to add and public comment. I mean, I don't want to get bogged down in 2 hours of public hearing, essentially, but use your best judgment, and I do think that it's important for people to know they can comment at other times besides all the way down to September 12th. And finally, I have a question about vacancies. I know that you're not going to be adding any more staff, but I also think that we have vacancies that need to be filled throughout the government, and I'd like to know a status report of those, because I don't want to get to the point where people are having trouble meeting the workload, or the remaining employees are very, very heavily tasked with trying to accomplish the work because of vacancies.
Yeah, Commissioner, and we understand that, and we are currently approving almost all the vacancies that are being submitted for review to the city manager's office. We're trying to get those approved and advertised as quickly as possible.
Okay.
But as you said, we do have a number of vacancies. It's taken some time to get them on the board and advertise, but we are doing our very best to get those, the departments the help that they need to be able to deliver the services that they need to deliver.
Good. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I had just one other question. In terms of the revenue, I know that we've got, Wayne, I think in your presentation you mentioned that we've got about 100 projects at some point in the process. But for those that will be coming online during fiscal year 19, are we anticipating the property tax revenue from those projects and building that into the budget as well?
Absolutely, Commissioner. Yes, that's in fact one of the exercises that we're doing is calendaring the pace with which something moves from planning to permitting to in-service, and then matching that to what it then goes through from a property appraiser, tax collector, and then ultimately our revenue realization. It really is a 3 to 5 year process. We're anxiously looking at that to see how it's going to affect us this coming year, so that we can predict well what those revenues will be.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Commissioner Ziffer.
Just a quick comment, and I apologize because the date eludes me now. The Clean Water Act, this is an issue nationally as a result of a lot of people that were employed in water and wastewater facilities as a result of the Clean Water Act. A lot of those people are coming close to retirement age, and I know nationally it is becoming an issue for a lot of different utilities. So if I could suggest, and I'm sure we've probably already done this, is looked at what kind of attrition we think we have in that area, and then also look at workforce training so that we could start to get some people engaged that are looking for work, that need retraining, because I know those are fairly good jobs, so that we can get ahead of the curve on that. The other thing is we've talked about the fact that as we see major roads that are going to be under construction or reconstruction, we've looked at hardening utilities and going underground. Are we also looking at some of these major private sector projects that are coming up? Are we doing anything at the same time in those areas just to make sure that we can probably save money?
Yes, sir. Commissioners, I can give you a couple examples when we're talking about development on South Monroe Street. We've already said our desire is to put everything underground that we can. And of course, you have Thursday, your agenda item for Magnolia Drive. Any opportunities we see to put power underground, especially in our urban area where it makes sense, we're going to try to accommodate that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller.
You've well, I can't figure out what page it is, but under, let me see, in the budget item under public infrastructure, it says as part of this commitment, the city anticipates bond financing in FY19 to accelerate priority projects listed below. I'm assuming you're going to build these things in FY19. Is that right?
Well, as I said in talking about the quarterly credit meeting, the idea is that we would review the scope, the construction schedules, and make that timing complementary to that. I think the current idea, and Jim could probably speak to that on the timing.
Yeah, just one other thought on that. I think that's exactly the right answer. But when we are bond financing, we don't necessarily say that project will happen in that year. Sometimes they're multi-year projects. Sometimes there may be a project in 19, 20, and 21. So you say we're going to borrow the money in 20, which allows you to reimburse yourself for 19 and be covered for 21, so that you're doing it in the most efficient way possible, limiting your issuance costs of doing so. There's always work to be done, and there's usually, particularly on capital projects like that, a driver that dictates the timing. So, for instance, the capital bonds that we're looking at later in 2019, I guess it's phase 3 of FAMU Way, that particular project which you've already approved and you know is coming. It's time to start spending that money, and so that was the catalyst for these very productive meetings with underground, electric, public infrastructure, everybody in the room, to say, here are all the things we have coming, and here's our expected timing, so let's do the deal then.
Right, well, the reason I said that is that one of these is Richview Pass, Road Pass, just for one example. And I think some of you, this was even before Commissioner Richardson or Meadows even on the commission, but early on in my term, my first term, we were entertained in the neighborhood by folks from Richview who were pointing out that school children were standing there lined up in the culvert basically in the morning and that kind of thing. And so it's really important to me that we move forward on these things, because most of these are, I don't know what one of these is, but most of these are things that we've been talking about getting done for a long time. I know I've gotten a lot of complaints sometimes in the moment of people who are sitting in traffic at Highway 90 and Capitol Circle in the morning, who have called me up right at the moment and said, you know, I'm sick of this, when. And so I know that this Weems Road extension is going to help with that. So just want to make sure we're on task and everybody's moving ahead and these things are going to get done. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, any other questions or comments for staff? If none, thank you all very much.
You guys have recommended actions in here.
Yes. We do ask that you accept the first quarter update. There were 2 sets of capital and operating budget amendments for public infrastructure and electric, slight adjustments to capital projects, and then if there was any additional direction for fiscal year 19.
Great. Commissioners, is there a motion on the staff request?
We accept.
Second.
For an update, there's a motion and a second to approve staff update with amendments. No discussion. All in favor, let me know by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion passes 4-0. Commissioner Maddox out of chamber. Superb update all the way around. We thank you very much for y'all's diligence, your work. You really do inspire confidence in the financial management of the city. So thank you. We stand in adjournment.